Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop, and we are approaching episode 5 of our How to Build a Mold series. So we are actively working on our plug, which is the mold for the mold, and we actually just got through wet sanding this thing, and now we are moving on into the compounding and polishing phase. And so what we're going to be using today, we're using a fast cut compound initially from Aqua Blue. That's the fast cut, and it's got a fairly aggressive texture to it. That's going to remove like your heavy oxidation if you were doing like a gelcoat restoration or on our initial cut. And as a matter of fact, you can see here I've already done a little sample area, just taken a couple of minutes and worked in a little, about a 2x2 area, just to kind of make sure everything's working as it should. And we're using a white wool pad. This 100% wool. This is a buff and shine. It's got the Velcro sticky back on it. And pad selection can be one of those things. Sometimes people get confused on that, and we talked about that in one of our other videos. But generally the white ones are going to be your heavier cut ones, and the yellow ones are going to be kind of a medium cut. So we will use the yellow with the Aqua Blue 200, which is going to be the buffing and polishing compound. So it's going to be a 2-phase process, and we're using our good old shop workhorse there. You've seen this in other videos, the big DeWalt. It's a variable speed, and it works really good. And again, this is like the sticky back or Velcro type pad. So pretty easy. We're gonna dive right into it. And generally, like with this kind of material, it comes in a gallon, which you guys know in the past I've used some other products. 3M in particular, I've used some of their compounds, but like a lot of things, it's good stuff, but the prices have just gone through the roof. Recently, I bought like a gallon of this. You can get a gallon for about the same price as a quart, basically, of the 3M product, and it goes a long way. Now, I'm using just a regular old chip brush, and generally I will like to work in about a 2x2 area, give or take. And I like to make sure we're using everything, because materials these days, you just want to get the most out of it. You don't want to waste any materials. I like to brush a little on, and you folks have seen me before with our spray bottles. A little bit of moisture on the compound, a little bit of moisture on the pad, and then generally I'm going to start it just nice and easy. We're running down at the 1,000 RPMs, which is quite slow. And I'm just using my finger to trigger that. That's not even anywhere near full speed. But if you hit this thing running full speed, it's gonna sling compound everywhere, and you don't really want that. As a side note, some good PPE, some eye protection, a mask, and some gloves are probably a good idea. Now notice on these edges, the rotation of the pad, I'm working down. I'm kind of leaning in a little bit where it's coming down. You don't want to have this edge working up underneath this lip. It could grab and catch and possibly damage the plug. So important to think about the rotation. Also important for safety to think about the positioning of the cord when you have this cord laying around, it can get wrapped up in the wheel if you're not careful. So I like to drape it across my shoulder. That also keeps it from potentially dragging across the mold. Now at this point, a lot of times what I may do is grab an air hose and clean out a little bit. Clean out a little bit of the material and just put a little bit of water on the surface. And this is kind of a finer phase of things. Y'all notice sometimes you'll have the pad start to jump or chatter a little bit. Sometimes just as it's starting to dry out, it'll do that. Sometimes it's okay to shift the pad, the pressure from one side to the other, or sometimes just lift off and start all over again. It's basically like it gets an oscillation, and sometimes it'll just go crazy. So just kind of be aware of that and don't necessarily panic if you're new to doing this kind of work. It happens even if you do this stuff all the time, but it's usually as the material is starting to dry out and as the pad is starting to dry out. Clean this pad just a little bit one more time. See that we are starting to develop a very nice shine at this point. And the cutting compound is pretty aggressive, so I generally like to do this kind of stuff in 2 phases. Hard to get it done in just one pass. Let's see if we can clean up some of this residue a little bit. And at this phase, I'm holding the pad nice and flat. All right. Yeah, that is looking pretty nice. Got a very decent distinction of image there. You can see my reflection. Now, sometimes at this phase, you will see maybe some little imperfections that were hard to see just in the wet sanding phase. And I do not know if it'll show up on the camera, but there are some little DA, the dual action sander, there's some little marks right in there that occasionally a piece of debris, some sand or some grit may get underneath your wet sanding paper. That was in the previous phase, and it'll create these little pigtails across. But that's okay, because once we built the mold off of this, those are little scratches that go down into the surface, but we're gonna be compounding and waxing this, and the wax will kind of help fill some of those little scratches. And then when we build the mold, anything that's a scratch in the plug is actually gonna be a high point in the mold, and we're gonna go over the inside of the mold with like some 1200 grit and compound it when it's done, and that'll get every one of those little imperfections. So if you see something like that in your plug, don't worry, it's okay. You can catch it on the next phase. We're almost ready to move to the polishing material, but I wanted you folks to see what the surface looked like once it was cleaned off. Now, I like to clean the surface between compounds, so I just used a mild soapy water solution, sprayed it over the surface, and then took a shop towel and thoroughly wiped it down and let it dry. I also like to do that after we've done our buff and polish. And it's important to remember that not all pads are the same. The yellow is going to be for like the 2000, which is more of a buff and polish. It's not your heavy cutting compound, and this is going to be a softer pad. It's going to be less aggressive, and in a lot of cases they'll move to a foam for even like a finer finish. And sometimes I will wet these a little bit. The fibers will kind of be laid over on themselves when you get them out of the package. You got a Velcro sticky back on there. Makes it really nice. Now, these are not throwaway, in my opinion. For the most part, you can get some good life out of them. A lot of times after I've compounded a bit, I'll soak it in some water and a little mild soapy solution, and you can use it again in the future without any problem. You want that thing centered up on there. Now, again, sometimes the initial stick, it may be off center a little bit. You'll tell you'll have a bit of a wobble. That feels pretty good. And I like to blow out all the hairs and fibers. You can see, I don't know if you folks can see them, it's blowing out a bunch of debris. Just remember, the disc is turning that way, and I'm kind of blowing with the rotation. Pretty good there. And I got a fresh brush. So again, you don't want to cross-contaminate, so don't use the same brush from the heavy cut. And the 200 is a different color there. So usually, again, we'll start where we started originally, a little heavier with a brand new pad, because there's no material in the pad yet, and you kind of got to load it up a little bit. All right. Bring my trusty water bottle. Just a little bit of moisture. More or less the same process. Ease into it nice and easy. Just get some material spread around. starting to look good. A little more of this, I'll show you the finished product. Woo! Oh yeah. There you go. I think that looks pretty good. What do you guys think? Oh man, I am glad to have that phase done. What we're going to do now, we're getting ready to move on to our wax. We're going to be using the Orca, which is the same company that makes the primers that we use, the gray primer. And it's important to note, again, for folks that are kind of new to this, mold release wax or mold release compound is different than just your normal wax that you might use at home to put on your boat or your car. It's formulated for this kind of application. So important if you're doing this at home. Now, I can't say for 100% certainty that a automotive wax would never work or can't work. I just know that this will work, and when you put this much time and effort into doing something like this, you want to use products that are going to give you a good result. So we're going to do the same as we did previously with the first coat. I will typically use a mild soap and water solution. We have gone over this thing very thoroughly. And I want to clean any compound residue off of this part. We're getting a little bit of moisture all the way around. You folks know that I'm a big fan of the shop towels. I buy these at our local Lowe's. They're real popular in the automotive world. And just a good thorough wipe down. We want to get any of that compound residue off of there. We want to get the compound out of the pores or any pores that are in this surface so that the mold release wax can go down in those pores. That's going to do a better job of helping release our part from the plug. And again, I want to thank everyone out there that's been following the channel. We've had really incredible growth, and once again, if you guys think of any way that you can share what we're doing here, any other fishing or boating forums that you might be on, and if everybody out there was just to help me get one more person to join the channel, the growth would be tremendous, and we could do a lot more of this kind of content. I have a lot of fun doing this. I'm so amazed at the response we're getting from everyone, even all over the world. I imagine when we first started doing this, it would just be the boating community here in our area maybe. But folks from the UK and Australia and everywhere in between, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much. All right. So normally what I'll do is I'll do that initial pass, and we will chunk that one and get a fresh one and start again. Let's see here if you guys can zoom in. Maybe we'll get a camera angle and you can see what we're talking about. Now, again, the plug a lot of times does not have to be 100% perfect. If there are some little imperfections, we almost always come back in and do a little bit of wet sanding and compounding on the mold once it comes off the plug, and that will take it that last 5 or 10%, make it look perfect. We have moved on, folks, because we are trying to get this thing finished up. Now I'm using the Orca, again, the mold release. Got a little foam applicator pad, works real good for doing this kind of stuff. Usually I'll load it, circulating in there a handful of times, and we're doing kind of a circular motion, overlapping circles, and then I go over kind of like a half lap on each coat. Zoom in there, you can see I'm kind of going halfway over the previous pass with each consecutive pass. There you go. And back here, it's kind of hard to do the circular passes on these little edges, but not impossible. it is okay to go back and forth. You just want to be sure when you're doing this, the applicator stays clean. Sometimes when you're in the process of waxing, you may lose your grip, and if it falls on the ground, probably a good idea just to get a whole nother applicator at that point, because any grit or sand in the pad is going to really create a hazard for our molded surface. And as you can see, I had already waxed up this way. There's nothing wrong with doing your circular motions and then a back and forth. Being thorough is the key here. You do not want to jump around. If you don't apply the wax properly, you can end up with a stuck part, and that is a bad thing. You do not want the mold to stick to the plug. You can destroy the part you spent a lot of time building. Now don't let that scare you away from building one of these parts, but it should encourage you to be very thorough in your wax application. When I was growing up, matter of fact, when we built our 29 here in the background, we applied 7 coats of wax. This company, they recommend 3 to 5 very thorough coats. And what that is just so that you are absolutely sure you do not miss any areas whatsoever. Now you folks notice I did the circular motion, and now I'm going to come back and I'm just going in line. Every time you go at a different angle or a different direction, potentially you're helping to work that wax down to every little crevice and pore that may be on the surface there. Work it in very thoroughly. That will even help fill in some of the little imperfections, little scratches that may be. Not a bad idea to have a helper doing this as well. When we're doing one of our big hulls like a 29, we'll have one person usually applying the wax, and then several feet behind, just as the wax starts to haze over, you'll have your helper, and they'll start to take some of the wax off. And we usually do a 2-cloth method. 1 cloth, you take the bulk wax off. 2nd cloth, look like Mr. Miyagi there, Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, Daniel-san. Lots of that, man, in the boat world. Lots of sanding and lots of wax on, wax off. Something very satisfying and therapeutic though about building something and seeing something that's kind of rough and unfinished and taking it to a shine and a polish. Something that I think a lot of you folks out there apparently are enjoying what we're doing. So we're gonna give that about 5 minutes or so, let it kind of haze off, and I'm gonna show you the removal process. So as you can see folks, this wax has kind of what we call hazed off. It doesn't feel wet or slick to the touch. It's firmed up a bit. Just nice, easy, steady motion there. A lot of times what we will do, again, using that circular motion, put it on, and a circular motion to take it off. You can already see that's putting more of a shine or a luster right there where the wax stops versus the unwaxed. And that's just the first coat. I tend to usually go heavy on the wax. I do not want a stuck part, and I would recommend everyone at home do the same for sure. And this is a good way to stay in shape, folks. You can just cancel your gym membership and go into mold building. I promise you, you'll burn some calories for sure. It's certainly starting to feel like summertime down here. This wax pulls off quite nice. And again, don't be surprised if you find some little ripples or some little pinholes or maybe even some scratches that were hard to see early on. That is pretty common, even if you've done a really good job. All right, that's looking quite nice. Quite nice. So there's a couple methods you can use also. So we've pulled that off. When I was growing up, a lot of times we just came back with a brand new fresh cloth and went over it. But if you want to go the extra step, we have changed to a blue pad here. This is a fairly soft one, and sometimes we'll come in there, just do a cleanup. Looking pretty. Look at that. All right, I think that looks pretty amazing. A nice shine on that. We went ahead and applied that full first coat of wax, removed most of it by hand, came back with a buffing wheel, and y'all may not have noticed I changed that buffing wheel to yet another. It's a blue pad, it's a soft one, kind of good for wax removal. But I think that's gonna be about it for today. Brief recap. The Aqua Blue 100 was what we started with. The Aqua Blue 200 was the second phase. We used the Orca Shimmer, which is a very specific mold release wax. And even prior to that, if you want to know what the coatings were, these were the Orca Composites, the Air Dry Surface Primer, and the Gray Sanding Primer. And the nice folks at Fiberglass Warehouse carry a lot of these supplies, and there will be a link in the description below, and they're even offering a discount for Fish Bump YouTube viewers. So be sure to take advantage of that. And if there are any folks out there that are interested in contacting me directly as far as a project you're working on and you need me to help walk you through it, you need to talk to me on the phone or video conference, Patreon would be the way to do that. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a way for you to have like a monthly membership, and there's different ways that you can access me for more information. So as always, I thank everyone out there that's watching so much. I know there's a lot of ways you can spend your time, and I thank you for spending your time here on the channel. Captain Joe here, my fantastic cameraman, as always, working hard behind the scenes, and we will catch you folks in the next episode.